Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I'm joined here by John Morehead, VP at Archetype Consulting. John began his career as a software engineer at Microsoft and then moved into Oracle EPM consulting and is now helping lead Archetype's growth in the OneStream space. John, thanks for joining me, and I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Charlie. Excited about it too.
Perfect. Yeah. You began your career as a software engineer at Microsoft, and over time you've moved into EPM consulting, and obviously now you're part of the leadership team at Archetype. What sort of inspired that journey, and how did each step in that journey prepare you for the role you're in today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was a relatively unique but very useful path in this
Mhm.
space. Yeah, I mean, I started programming when I was like 12. I've loved computers since I was a kid, and I really enjoyed programming and the problem-solving aspect of that. And I always thought I was going to go into software development. When I worked for Microsoft, I realized that, working at least at a big company, certainly, but just in general, the life cycle of software development wasn't my favorite. It just didn't quite fit what I was looking for, and I didn't at the time, honestly, didn't know maybe why exactly, other than I just knew it wasn't the best fit. So I ended up doing just a little bit of freelance work for a while, and one of my friends from university reached out and said, "Hey, I think you might be really good for this position." We had been close in college, had basically the same educational experience, and she had gone into FP&A and then had been pulled into Oracle implementations because her company had implemented Hyperion planning. And she was like, "I think you'd be really good," because I was, kind of reaching out in my network looking for next opportunities. So I ended up actually turning down my first job offer in the industry because it just seemed too accountant-y and boring, or whatever you might say.
Yeah.
But luckily, she persisted and said, "Well, talk to one other person." And I talked to a guy named Eric Helmer, actually, who's still very big in that Oracle space, and he was an incredibly intelligent individual. And I liked the chemistry we had, and like the feeling of like, okay, this is
Yeah.
someone I would enjoy working for. And he kind of gave me a different spin on the experience that was like, okay, I could see why this would be kind of cool. So I ended up joining up, and I was actually implementing the infrastructure side first, just installing and configuring on the server side, because I had experience obviously with that as well. But then got brought quickly into consulting because they had a need on the build side, and kind of excelled at it. And again, I think that problem solving nature, right? That idea of like, okay, what's going on and what needs to get done, and that joy that I had around that and that skill set applied very well. And so I did well at it, and I understood the data structures we were working with. Multidimensional databases, I think, can sometimes be a little bit confusing to people at first, but I really kind of took to it very naturally. And so I think that, again, my background, I had a background in business and finance, but a strong technical nature, and enjoy doing that last mile. That's what I realized over my career is what I really enjoy about programming or problem solving, is that getting at that last mile to be done, right? So
Mm.
like implementing, whether it was Hyperion or OneStream, they wrote the software that has to fit a lot of different use
Mm.
cases, and I get to come in as a consultant and make it work for this client. And that really has been, I think, the most enjoyable thing about the career for me, and where I think my skill set really has shined. So I did well in the Oracle EPM space. I liked it. I found, well, OneStream actually originally in 2016, although I didn't get to work on it full time until 2018. I took a little detour in
Mm.
the Anaplan world because that's just where our practice decided to go. Again, I think it was useful though to kind of get some broader technical experience. But OneStream has really suited me, particularly because it is built on the Microsoft stack, so it does use .NET, and my
Mm.
experience working for Microsoft obviously very much helps. And one of the things I like the most about it is how open the system is, allowing you to program code wherever you need to kind of bolt on. And it really gives us the flexibility to meet our client needs. It's always a question now, not if I can do it, which it always was before. It's like, I can't even do this for you. I understand why you need it, but I can't. With OneStream, it's never a question is can we? It's, is the ROI there? Is the return on investment it's going to take, the effort it's going to take, really worth it? And that's one of the things I love about OneStream, is we can just do so much. And I think we'll talk a little bit about it, but I've implemented a wide variety of different solutions on OneStream, and the ability to do that and really customize, well, not even customize, configure specifically, because it is still, you're not touching their core code. You're just bolting on your code, but the ability to do that to the extent you can is really incredible. So that's a bit of a windy answer, but I think it probably gets us where we need to go.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's an incredibly detailed answer. and something that I appreciate. You mentioned you started with Oracle EPM, and then you had a bit of a well, you sidetracked into Anaplan, and then
Mhm.
OneStream. Ultimately, you've ended up, and your success speaks for itself in that regard. I guess just as a more generalized question, how has the EPM consulting space in general sort of evolved since you first started?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, the biggest change, at least in my career span, has been the amount of remote work. And I think that's been everywhere, but I think it's been especially felt in general in consulting, and especially with kind of what I'll call more niche consulting like this, right? Where we're working with a much smaller portion of the company. And so we can work pretty effectively remote. Pre-COVID, we had already started moving more towards like 50-50. Like when I started, it was, 3 weeks travel to the client, maybe 1 week off, maybe sometimes 4-1, right? It's very on-site heavy. But that had already started changing. But then obviously in the post-COVID world, it's gone almost all remote. And that's certainly the biggest single change. I think we've also though seen some changes in the amount of tools out there, and so the ways people evaluate software and the degree to which they have to evaluate. I mean, I think starting in the earliest days back when it was just Essbase and Arborsoft, that was kind of either that or Excel or Lotus, whatever you had. And there's, over time been more and more and more options. Certainly when I was working in the early days of when Oracle acquired Hyperion, it was still, far and away the dominant player.
Mm.
And OneStream coming into the market obviously has been very disruptive. But again, you've seen a lot of other tools come up, Anaplan, Adaptive, Planful. A number of companies have really come into the space and made great products. So it's become more competitive, and I think because it's matured, the ways that companies evaluate that software has changed as well. They've become more aware of potential pitfalls and what they want, and so buyers are a little bit more discerning and ask a little bit more directed questions. Whereas before, I think they would have relied a little bit more on the consultants to direct them and to help them, make choices, which I think just kind of reflects broader trends in the culture with the internet age, right? I have
Yeah.
access to so much more information, and that's really it's definitely impacted the EPM space as well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Just to touch sort of, you mentioned how the EPM space has changed. Obviously, you've been consulting for a while. So I guess what would be interesting to know would be, is there anything you sort of learned earlier on in your career that were maybe a teachable moment and a big lesson that still shape how you approach your projects today?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to really listening to your clients, right? I think
Mhm.
early, from a personal perspective, when I was younger and eager, I think would make some assumptions about what was going on and what needed to be done, and that can be very powerful at times. I mean, that's one of the reasons you bring in a consultant is they have a broad experience base to draw upon to help answer your questions and fix your problems quickly. But I think one of the things that I've learned the most is just to ask more questions, to be curious, and to get down to the core roots of the issues and what's going on, so that you can design the best solution. I think there's been a number of times early in my career where I designed a solution that worked, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. I discovered later on because I saw once they started using it, then I could see, oh, see how you're using this now. And if I just asked some earlier questions, some more upstream questions, I could have come to a better, conclusion about how to better structure that. So, I think that's one of the biggest things that I do now is that I try to ask. We usually start with what's the biggest pain point, right? What's the problem we're trying to solve? The clients always have a problem. That's why they bring you in. But to really make sure you explore upstream and downstream of that problem to understand the context in which it happens. And I think that's probably been my biggest personal lesson around how to better run, these projects and structure these things. That goes all the way into the sales phase. That now it's right. Try to be as curious as possible in the sales phase
Mm.
and ask as many questions. And luckily too, what I found is that really establishes a good relationship and trust from the beginning. To be curious about what they're doing and to show understanding of what's happening in your client, that I think builds a lot of trust in them to go, okay, this guy gets what's going on and can
Yeah.
can help us, right? And so that's been, I think, very useful to extend even to the sales phase. So Yeah, that's been my biggest personal thing that I like to do is just again be curious and ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a recruiter, I can sort of relate to that as well.
Mhm.
Really understanding the pain points of the clients that you're working with, as they're definitely best placed to sort of, let you know how to fix their issue. So it's great to sort of go in with a blank slate, so to speak, and sort of not make assumptions and let them, you know, tell you how to help them. So yeah, that's a great answer. Obviously, you've been on the technical side for a long time before stepping over into leadership. So
Mhm.
I think what would be really interesting to know was, how your technical background sort of influenced the way that you now manage teams and projects.
Yeah, I would say mostly from we'll call it like an empathetic standpoint, right? I can empathize with what's going on. I know I've had that experience to understand what they're doing. And also, I think as a leader in general, and I think this applies across the board. The more you've been doing the thing that you're leading, the more trust people have in you, right? And so I think it's just good to continually display that you understand what's going on and that you're not afraid to get your hands dirty a little bit. Again, that's another I think quality of a good leader is they're willing to dive in, right? And it makes people I think a lot believe in you a lot more and want to follow your lead. Like, okay, this person knows what they're doing and they're working. And we're all human, we all make mistakes, but it's a lot easier to understand a mistake that's made in the context of trying, actually getting your hands dirty, so to speak, as opposed to like, well, this leader just kind of called the shots and, we flubbed it. And if they'd have listened to me or if they'd have thought, to ask questions and to get involved, they would have seen this comment, right? I think that's something that can destroy that kind of relationship capital, that trust
Yeah,
very quickly. So trying to stay connected, try to do the thing and asking again, being curious, asking what the team thinks. At the end of the day, as a leader, it's your job to make the decision and take the responsibility for the action. But I think to make sure that the team feels like okay, this was a team effort. And even if I disagreed, I was heard. And this person has the experience of the other one taking the heat. So I'm gonna trust that it's the best way to go. I think that's kind of my the biggest thing that I came from that technical side. And then, just the way I approach problem solving, I think I still apply that both to individual problems, like in managing an individual employee and in managing teams and projects is always breaking it down to the first principle, the simplest thing, right? What is really going on here? If it's an interpersonal conflict, what's really the irritation? How do we, fix this? If there's a problem with the project, if it's not going on schedule on time, what's the first thing we need to solve? And
mm,
breaking problems down into smaller chunks and solving them. That's something that I really learned early on as part of my programming experience, right? That I think influences the way I think about all problems.
yeah, great answer. Just to sort of be clear on that answer, would you say sort of empathy and leading by example would be two of the biggest traits of a good leader?
Yeah, for sure. And that means being competent to, I mean,
Mm, yeah,
it's one of those things where, when I look at people who want to be leaders in some of my, employees that I'm managing, and I can see they have that potential. Um, it's like, yeah, work on your competency because if you have the desire to help people, which is again how I think of leadership is being out in front and helping make way for the team, right? To drive a path for the team to follow. And that's in a lot of ways it's a helpful thing. You're not, you know, it could be egotistically driven, but it can also be
yeah,
a team role. There's got to be a leader. Right? You get to recognize that
mm,
human beings like hierarchy, and we do best when there's someone on point taking
yeah.
taking the heat and making the calls. And so, again, if you want to do that, building up your competency first, I think is the best thing you can do for setting the base for a solid leadership position.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and more so sort of cultivating an environment which allows your staff to be as successful as possible, I suppose. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, great answer. Obviously, you've been with Archetype for almost 7 years now, and you've moved up
Mhm,
from the director level all the way up to VP now.
mhm.
To company as a whole, what's sort of been the biggest driving force behind the growth at Archetype in that time that you've been there?
Well, I like to think of it as our team structure, right? And the fact that again, these principles that I'm talking about, I've learned from the people that are leading me, from Jason, our CEO. on down through all the managers that I've had through the years. It's always been a very team oriented culture. I would tell people when they were doing interviews and asking questions about Archetype, that I've never been at a company where so routinely in our company meetings the CEO is saying, is Archetype still a great place to work? Is this a place where employees feel heard and cared about, and are we leading the way? And so it's a culture thing, I guess. At the end of the day, we value high performing. We value creating, great solutions for our customers, but we value doing it in a team atmosphere, in a supportive place where everyone's got each other's back, where everyone's success is everyone's success. And I think that's a relatively unique culture. And it's something that we've thought a lot about. How do we maintain this as we grow? It's been a continual, point of leadership discussion and team discussion. Is we want to keep growing. We think we can. We think it's great for everyone that we do. But how do we do that while holding on to that culture that I think has been so vital to our success, individual success to company success?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whatever it is that you're doing, it's obviously working. We've been able to observe the success that Archetype has been having. But I guess just to touch on that a little bit further, what do you think it is that Archetype does that's different to maybe other EPM consulting companies, and sort of differentiates itself, sets itself apart from competitors in what is sort of a crowded market?
I think one of the things that we have again is that everyone's success is everyone's success, and so there's a strong consideration on what's going on across the practice, regular discussions with everyone. We have every other week we have knowledge transfer meetings where our consultants are talking about what they've built at clients that works best for them, what's been going on. Leadership is constantly asking questions, and all the architects and even regular line consultants, if you will, are talking to each other constantly, even if they're not on the same projects, right? So again, it's that true, I think, team environment where when we come in and you don't just have the team that's working for you, you have all of Archetype behind that project. And so whenever a project maybe faces some significant challenges, then you've got this big team behind it that can help problem solve and hopefully break it down quickly and keep it all moving forward. And we really emphasize, I think, that our client, we want all of our clients to be referenceable, just like OneStream does. That's where it was a nice tight alignment from a cultural standpoint, from a partnership standpoint there. And we back up our words with actions by doing it. And between that and I think the way we encourage creativity too, I think a lot of our competitors implement OneStream and they want to do it certain ways, and there's something certainly to be said for best practices, obviously. But again, I think we have a culture of every client, as much as they might, again, have a lot of commonalities with our other clients, and that's where a lot of our value comes in. We want to do that listening and figure out what is it exactly you need, and we'll tackle we'll tackle that complex issue you have, that real pain point that's not quite the same as everyone else, and make sure your system fits you, really well. And I think we've stood out as one of the partners that has built some of the most creative and out of the box solutions, right? And certainly by volume, I think everyone's done some interesting things. I don't want to take away from any of our competitors. I think they're all very strong as well, but I think that the way we apply our creativity is consistent, and there's more of that, I think, than some of our competitors. So I think that's where we shine. Where if you've got something like that you really need to tackle, that's where I think we'd be a great partner to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned there on sort of being able to offer creative out of the box solutions for your clients, which is obviously something that there is a need for. It would be interesting to know sort of, over your career in the consulting space, how you've seen expectations shift over, say, the last decade from clients themselves. What are the more common issues that you're seeing arising that people are coming to you with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an expectation. This is one of the changes maybe that could have mentioned earlier too, but as technology in general is progressed, there's kind of this expectation that the software you're getting is going to meet a lot of your needs out of the box. And I think that's certainly true. I think we've seen all the technology platforms evolve and more functionality exists out of the box as they out of the software box, is to say, right? Not two ways to use it, but when you implement software, that you get that functionality, right away, so to speak, versus having to configure it or build on top of. Um, so that certainly I think has been an evolving expectation. And then I think ease of use is another one. Again, the further back you go, the more people are used to, well, this is kind of software specifically for this. I'm gonna learn this skill set. And now more and more people are kind of expecting the software to be more intuitive and more useful. And that's one of the things that we really do focus on at Archetype whenever we're building systems for our customers, especially things that are not strictly financial. Like we've done a few implementations that involve operations, right, and specifically like project managers and stuff. And so they're not used to thinking the way a financial system works, but they're project managers. They think in that way. And so again, this is where I think OneStream really shines, that we can create a user experience there that's intuitive for them and create another user experience that's intuitive for a finance user, and have those be two totally different tracks, but in the same software, and in a way that connects them too. And that's where I think there's a lot of value in software like this. And I think that's where we're seeing the market shift more and more to, is this unified approach of the systems should be talking to each other more. And that I think is probably another expectation, is that there's less difficulty in integrating systems. Even in, again, the late 90s, early 2000s, I think people would have completely understood that my ERP system over here is a totally separate beast from my CPM system, is totally different from my my CRM system or my HR system, right? Those are all owned by individual people, and they're on different infrastructure and different underlying data structures. And so there was this understanding that they're going to take some time to connect. Whereas I think these days the market expects there to be more and more seamless connection of data as the technology evolves in that direction. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of the top things that come to my mind when you ask that question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really interesting to know. You sort of mentioned that you're seeing a lot more that businesses are moving over to one unified system. Obviously, OneStream seems to be leading the way in that respect. But in the same breath, you probably do have companies that are hesitant to modernize their EPM platforms. There's many reasons as to why that's the case. But you also mentioned previously you're on the pre-sale side now as well. So are you able to share, what is typically holding these companies back that are afraid to modernize their systems, and how do you guide them past those roadblocks?
Yeah, I think the ones that you see that are the most hesitant are bigger companies who have well-established processes that are working, even if they can foresee that they need to move on, right? That's the nice thing about the bigger the company is, the more technology investment they generally have. And so they're aware that they need to be ahead of the curve. They don't want to fall behind. But it's one of those things where it's like, well, but it also isn't broke, don't fix it, right? And what's it going to look like? And so those customers are much more discerning around taking the time to evaluate the software platforms and evaluate all their options to make sure they're making the right choice. And they ask a lot of very detailed questions. They want to understand up front, what are we really getting into, because we're used to owning this stuff. And that is also another roadblock that we see. And I think you see this across the board go to the cloud. Less of it these days. That certainly has, especially again post-COVID, has started to really slacken a bit. But this, customers used to really own all their stuff on premise, all their software. IT department owned it; it was right there. I think the early part of the cloud migration, we saw a lot of IT hesitancy and reticence to move to the cloud. In part, I think because it was maybe threatening from a job, security perspective. Like, well, it means we're not going to need to do this anymore. And also a degree of we don't own it; we're not going to have the same security around it and stuff. I think we've seen that all of those have been dispelled over time as they realize it's going to take just as much effort to keep these systems connected. It doesn't really matter where they live. And companies understand that their time is more efficiently spent, their time and money, by having people who know how to maintain this software, maintain it, and having you just maintain the strategy and the connectedness and understand how the users are going to interact with it. So, and so there was a bit of hesitancy from there. I think that's mostly dissipated though, except that some of the, I guess, slowest movers, the most reluctant movers, where you still have a lot of on-prem experience. But that was one of the things that I think that OneStream really did a great job of straddling the line, because while they were cloud from the very beginning, it was always single tenant cloud. It was effectively, we're just hosting for you. And if you want to do it on-prem, you can. And the migration from on-prem to cloud was basically seamless. It took a few hours really. And so they really did a great job, I think, of offering some options that that helped companies become more comfortable in that move. But yeah, today I think it's mostly just about, well, we know what the software does. We're used to using it in this way. We need to make sure we're not losing any functionality. And we need to understand what's the cost to upgrade going to be, what are the benefits, and really doing a detailed ROI assessment of it. I think that's the biggest thing. That just take the time to do a really detailed look into what's it going to cost and what are we going to get out of it.
Yeah, and I guess it's just being able to offer that reassurance, and sort of letting them know that the decision is a right one, and I guess inevitable, at this stage in the world we're living in.
Well, and luckily, I think at this point there's a lot of references that are available, and that tends to be one of the most powerful, tools in that particular to solve that particular problem is having customers talk to other customers in very similar positions and gone through it, right, and gone, oh, okay. They can very easily explain what did it take, what were some of the unexpected bumps, the things we didn't see coming, so that other people can plan better, and also what are the things we've gotten out of it, both expected and unexpected. And we find those to be very useful. And again, it makes sense. It's human beings like to see and see that it actually worked, right, and get some firsthand experience, especially for people who aren't directly incentivized to sell the software, right? It always helps to have someone who's just an advocate for the software, even though they're not getting anything specific out of it. So I think it's not surprising, but that tends to be the most useful thing to do is connect with the people who've been in their situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and that makes complete sense. Moving on to sort of OneStream itself, and sort of the roadmap looking forward. AI is obviously becoming a hot topic in general, and specifically in the EPM space too. Obviously, OneStream themselves with Sensible AI, sort of leading the way in that respect as well. From your perspective, what do you foresee is sort of hype? There's a lot of unknown around AI itself versus what you think is actually truly valuable to customers right now.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, my general stance on AI is I think it's an incredibly useful tool, and I'm very excited to see how it evolves in the future. There tends to be a slow development of concrete use cases, right? It takes a little while. I think it's taken some time to come up with concrete use cases. But I think one of the coolest things that I see coming in the relatively near future is just the ability to chat with your system, right? That's where I think the biggest, obviously, large language models and like ChatGPT is probably the biggest AI jump we've had in a while. And I think OneStream is really aware of that and has a great vision of trying to figure out how to chat with your system. So you can say, hey, how much did we miss our quarterly earnings by, or how much did we beat our quarterly earnings by? And the system can quickly, talk to you about what's going on, almost as if it was, kind of a low-level analyst. But, I don't think, just like every other application of AI, I don't think it's going to replace everything that humans do, at least certainly not in the next few decades. But it will really enhance our ability to quickly get where we need to go. And that's, again, I think that's what we've seen. That's how I use ChatGPT. I don't know about you, but I use ChatGPT to get started on something and to get, especially for something that I'm not hugely aware of, kind of get my bearings. But then you have to start diving deeper on your own and do your own, finishing touches, if you will. And I think that we're going to see probably a very similar progression there. And again, I think that's where OneStream is really leading the way. They are making a significant investment. The new I think it's called Sensible AI Studio is coming out to allow you to do even more AI related tasks. They started basically just with time series, which is the most obvious use case for finance, is just looking at, evaluating how can we get better trends, right? Because from an FP&A perspective, we're always looking for better ways to forecast our numbers. And so using AI for that was kind of like the first and most obvious use case. But now with AI Studio, they're getting away from just that and allowing you to do more specific AI stuff. And I know that at the same time, they're also working on those language models in the background, trying to enable more and more, in direct kind of interaction with the system that way. And I think that's probably the coolest thing that's coming down the pipe, personally, in CPM specific AI applications. Beyond that, man, I think it remains to be seen. I think that again, looking at ways to help connect operations and finance some more is a great place where AI can be helpful, because that's that's a really important part of what the finance team does. One of the things that I've always said talking to my clients is, I believe that one of the jobs or missions of the office of the CFO is to help create a more financially aware organization, right? Because finances are how we measure the health of a company. It's how we measure the success and what's going on, and everyone's decisions impact the success of the company. And the more they can understand, it's just like becoming familiar with your own health metrics, like what your blood pressure should be and your heart rate and your cholesterol numbers. Like the more aware of those you are, and the more you can routinely measure them and see how the decisions you're making are affecting the health of the company, the better the overall company is, right? The more the whole company is aware of that. And that's where I think AI can really start to make a difference, is to bring the operations people more into financial awareness and be able to interact with finances in a way that's a little bit more intuitive, because I think that's the biggest block. Finance people are the ones who live and breathe in Excel and who love numbers and whose minds just work that way. And if your mind doesn't just work that way, then you need some help. And that's where I think AI can really help bridge the gap. So I'm excited to see those things evolve over time.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, I think you touched on it there, that it's not gonna sort of replace the more senior members of the consulting world, the ones that are implementing the software itself, but it's going to act as a good medium to be able to present the maybe not financially sort of minded individuals to be able to understand the data in an easier way, which is going to be really helpful. Obviously, AI is moving at a rapid pace. Sort of what's your prediction for the adoption of AI? Obviously, OneStream we mentioned there, it's moving quite quickly. And how do you think consultants should prepare for this?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of incumbent upon everyone in any space where technology is prolific to try and become more aware of what's going on with AI. I mean, I think that's just a generally good career move for everyone. You don't want to get left behind. It's just going to become like an understanding of at least basic AI interaction is going to become a standard skill. Just like, just using Excel is for finance. I mean, you can't use Excel, then you probably shouldn't be in finance. You know what I mean? And I think AI is going to become, a basic skill set across everything. It will. I don't think I have a good pulse, honestly, on any sort of significant timeline. My gut feeling is still it's probably 5+ years away from any sort of broad adoption. They're going to see plenty of early adopters in places where there's a lot of great specific use cases. We've already seen, a few of these time series customers that have lots of good data, retailers, and who already look at seasonality and stuff like that, are already using time forecasting, time series forecasting and AI to get better forecasts there. And that's helped the industry evolve that, and eventually I think it'll become more widespread across other industries. And so I think we'll see more focused adoption, but I think widespread adoption is probably still, 5 years or so away. That being said, I would have said the same thing right before ChatGPT dropped, that, broad AI usage in culture was years away, and that was an overnight change. So, just like predicting the future of the company's finances, this is a bit thumb to the wind, so don't hold me to it, but that's my best guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm in agreement with you there. We don't know how quick it's all going to evolve, but it's going to be exciting for sure to see how it pans out. Obviously, that's looking forward into the future. I would sort of be curious to know, and for people who are thinking of entering the EPM consulting field today, looking back on your career, is there any advice that you could offer anyone that's thinking of starting out a career in the space?
I mean, for me, the thing that I always look for in young employees is attitude and desire to learn, which is part of attitude, I guess. Again, it goes back to that curiosity. If you're curious about something, I can teach you everything you need to know. People talk about skill sets, and honestly, like, it's great when we're looking at recruiting and someone's already got OneStream experience, but if I run across the resume of someone who's clearly eager to get involved, and they're showing that, like, hey, I want to learn. This is somewhat interesting to me. It's interesting enough that I really want to get going, and I'm highly interested in building a career. Then that's what I care the most about when I'm hiring. That requires obviously just a general level of intelligence and basic problem solving skills. But I guess investing in the basics and not worrying too much about industry specific skill sets, because you develop that over time. Being able to talk about and understand it's important and useful. But again, if I get someone who's got rote OneStream knowledge, but doesn't show general problem solving aptitude and isn't like showing some excitement and eagerness, it's like that's not nearly as interesting of a candidate to me personally.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's my personal bias because that's how I kind of was as a younger employee. So I got to take that with a grain of salt. But I think that's really, that attitude is probably the biggest thing for building a successful career anywhere, but especially I think in our specific market, because the skill sets are evolving. I mean, when I started, again, Oracle, I mean, OneStream wasn't even around. It was all Oracle.
Yeah.
Or Hyperion, actually, and then quickly became Oracle. And then, the technologies shift, and even OneStream itself is different than it was 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, the basics are still there, but the things that you need to know have expanded. And so having a specific skill set is far less important than having a specific mindset.
Yeah, that's really interesting for someone, starting out, sort of moving towards how you build high performing teams, not necessarily looking at people who are starting out, but sort of when you're looking to build teams and take people on who, maybe 5-10 years, into their career. What would you say is the biggest traits that you look for in someone, that is more senior? Maybe it be leadership or specific knowledge on a certain part of the tool. What sort of most stands out to you when building high performing teams?
Well, still mindset is the biggest thing for sure. But after that would come what you might call soft skills, right? I mean, because in consulting, at the end of the day, we deal with people, right? We're dealing with technology, and if you just want to be a tech leader, that's also a big distinction. So once you're a few years along, are you going to be kind of that individual contributor path where, hey, I just want to be a OneStream expert and I really want to code the coolest stuff and crank out cool work there, but I don't really want to interact a lot with the client? There's definitely a career path there, but as far as building high performing teams, that tends to be more. I want people with good people skills, with the understanding of how to deal and build relationships, especially because again, that's a big thing in consulting. Is I think one of the things that's really set me apart in my career is my ability to build relationships quickly, to demonstrate that I'm trustable, that I understand what's going on, that I care, and that goes back into those other things that I'm locked in. And when you can do relationship building quickly, it helps with sales, it helps with team building, it helps with delivery, because at the end of the day, there's always so many unexpecteds in a project. Like nothing goes perfectly to plan ever. And when you're navigating that with a client, if you have trust and if they feel like they've got the right people, then the problems will get sorted out, right? They obviously want to know you have the baseline skills to do what they're asking you to do, but there's a lot of people out there with that. But if you want to differentiate, it comes down to, I think, again, the ability to have those good soft skills. So yeah, for people further along in their career who are looking to get into leadership, paying attention to that is important. Reading how to make friends and win people to. Oh man, that book, I'm blanking on the title. Isn't it Dale Carnegie? How to win friends and influence people.
Win friends and influence people. Yeah.
That's classic in that. But studying that, understanding, like taking the time to really think about how to develop relationships with people and those good soft skills are the biggest things I look for in leaders, for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's something that we probably have common ground on as well. Coming from a recruitment background, sort of having those people skills and understanding sort of that side of thing, being trustworthy, being able to deliver, is such an important part of the business. So yeah, I really appreciate your thoughts on that. But yeah, it's been a really insightful conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your journey and your perspective on where the EPM space is headed. To those who've listened to the podcast, if you would like to learn more about Archetype or John himself, I'll sort of leave the links in the show notes, and you can connect over with him. And really appreciate you tuning in, and John for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlie, for your interest and curiosity, and to the audience as well. It's been a pleasure.
Perfect.